The rain fell in heavy sheets against the city streets, each drop a reminder of the cold reality that Detective Ethan Grayson faced every day. The city was a labyrinth of secrets, and he had spent years navigating its winding alleys, solving murders that would make most men shudder. But this was different. The murder scene was untouched, pristine even. A young woman, no older than 30, lay motionless in her apartment. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no weapon. The coroner confirmed what Ethan already suspected. She had been dead for hours, but there was no apparent cause of death. "Another one," muttered Officer Harris as he approached Ethan at the scene. "Same as the others. No struggle, no witnesses." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. This was the fourth victim in a month, all killed under identical circumstances. Each crime scene was immaculate, devoid of the usual evidence. It was as if the killer were a ghost, leaving no trace behind. As Ethan surveyed the room, something caught his eye. A faint shimmer in the corner, almost like a mirage. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, but it left a strange feeling in his gut. He brushed it off. Stress, maybe? Lack of sleep? It didn't matter. He had a killer to catch. Back at the precinct, Ethan spread out the files on his desk. 4 victims. No leads. No patterns. Just death. As he stared at the pictures, he felt a chill creep up his spine. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. Something vital. That night, as Ethan drove home, the shimmer appeared again, this time in his rearview mirror. For a split second, he saw a figure, tall, faceless, and draped in shadow. He blinked, and it was gone. Shaken, Ethan pulled over, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His breath quickened. Was he losing his mind? Or was there something more to this case than he had first realized? The following day, Ethan returned to the crime scene. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something kept pulling him back. As he entered the apartment, that same shimmer flickered in the corner of his vision. This time, he was ready. Ethan turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. There, in the shadows, it stood. A figure, barely visible, like a smudge in reality. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but Ethan could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady. The figure said nothing, but the room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with dread. Suddenly, the figure shifted, its form becoming more distinct. Ethan could make out a face, or at least what resembled one. Its eyes were hollow, voids of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around them. And then, in the silence, Ethan heard it. A faint whisper, like a distant scream trapped in the wind. "Ethan?" He staggered back, his pulse racing. How did it know his name? And more importantly, what was it? The figure disappeared, leaving Ethan alone in the room, his mind reeling. He had faced killers before, human killers. But this was something else, something unnatural. As he left the apartment, Ethan's phone buzzed. Another murder. Same circumstances, same lack of evidence. His blood ran cold. Ethan couldn't shake the encounter. The figure's presence lingered in his thoughts, haunting him like a shadow he couldn't escape. He tried to focus on the case, poring over the files again and again, but nothing made sense. The victims had no connection, no shared history. The only thing linking them was their inexplicable deaths. Days passed, and the body count grew. Each victim was killed in the same eerie fashion, as if the killer could pass through walls, leave no trace, and vanish without a sound. Ethan began to notice the figure more frequently. At first, it appeared in the corner of his vision, just a flicker, barely noticeable. But soon it became more brazen, standing in the middle of rooms, watching him with those hollow eyes. No one else could see it. Ethan tried asking his colleagues, subtly at first, but they looked at him like he was losing his grip on reality. And maybe he was, but he knew what he saw. This thing, this entity, it was real, and it was watching him. One night, as he sat in his apartment, the figure appeared again. This time it spoke, its voice like nails scraping against stone. "You can't stop me, Ethan." The words sent a chill through his entire body. He stood, his fists clenched, but he knew there was nothing he could do. How do you fight something you can't touch? Something you can barely see? The entity vanished, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He needed answers. He needed to know what he was up against. Ethan turned to the only place he thought might hold answers, the occult. He wasn't a believer in the supernatural, but nothing about this case was natural. He sought out a local medium, a woman known for her connection to the spirit world. "You're being hunted," she said, her eyes clouded with a strange intensity. "This entity, it's not of this world. It's drawn to death, to fear. And now it's drawn to you." Ethan felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. "Why me? You can see it. Most can't. But once you've seen it, it's too late. It will follow you. It feeds off you." The medium's words echoed in his mind as he left. Ethan had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to think logically. But now he found himself questioning everything. That night, the entity returned. This time, it didn't stay in the shadows. It stood in the middle of Ethan's bedroom, its form clearer than ever before. "Why?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why are you doing this?" The entity didn't answer. Instead, it moved closer, and for the first time, Ethan felt its touch, a cold, suffocating presence that seemed to drain the life from him. He gasped, falling to his knees as darkness closed in around him. Ethan awoke to find the figure gone, but its presence lingered like a weight on his chest. He knew he couldn't keep running. He had to confront it. But how? He retraced the steps of the victims, visiting their homes, their workplaces, trying to find any common thread. And then it hit him, the shimmer. Each time he saw it, it was near something reflective, a mirror, a window, even a polished surface. That night, he set a trap. He surrounded himself with mirrors, waiting, knowing the entity would come. And it did. It appeared, slowly at first, like a ripple in the air. But as it moved closer to the mirrors, its form wavered, distorted. "You can't escape," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He had figured it out. The entity could only exist in reflections. He smashed one of the mirrors, and the entity recoiled, its form flickering. One by one, Ethan shattered the mirrors. And with each blow, the entity grew weaker, its shape dissolving into nothingness. Finally, there was silence. The murders stopped. The city returned to its normal rhythm, but Ethan was changed. He knew the entity wasn't truly gone. It was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another victim. And every time Ethan caught a glimpse of his reflection, he wondered if it was waiting for him too. The city streets no longer felt the same to Ethan. Though the murders had ceased, the chill in the air that used to signal an oncoming storm now carried a different kind of weight. A foreboding that clung to him wherever he went. His reflection in store windows, puddles on the street, and even the gleaming metal of his own gun sent shivers down his spine. He had destroyed the mirrors that night, forcing the entity back into whatever dark corner it came from. But deep down, Ethan knew it was not truly gone. It was just waiting. Days turned into weeks, and the routine of his work slowly resumed. His colleagues praised his tenacity, though they had no idea what he had really encountered. To them, the case was closed. A mystery, but nothing more than another unsolved chapter in the city's long history of violence. Ethan let them believe it. After all, what could he say? That the killer had been an invisible force of pure malice? That he had battled a shadow in his own reflection? No one would understand. No one could. But Ethan understood. Every night when he returned to his apartment, he could feel its presence, lurking just outside the edge of his vision. The sensation was subtle but constant, like the echo of a whisper he couldn't quite hear. He had smashed the mirrors that night, true, but he hadn't destroyed them all. Reflections existed everywhere. In glass, in water, even in the gleam of his own tired eyes staring back at him from the bathroom sink. He hadn't slept much since that night. How could he? He had seen what lay beyond the world of the living, a force that defied all explanation. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those hollow, black voids where the entity's eyes should have been, staring deep into his soul. He knew it was only a matter of time before it came for him again. The problem was, the more Ethan tried to forget, the more he started to notice. Little things at first, an odd shimmer in the corner of a window as he passed by, a fleeting shadow darting just out of sight. He would tell himself it was nothing, a trick of the mind. But then, it grew stronger. One evening, as Ethan sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, he caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the TV screen. His heart skipped a beat, his body tensing. Slowly, he turned to face the room, but there was nothing there. Just the same empty space as always. His eyes flicked back to the screen. There it was. In the reflection, the faint outline of a figure. Not fully formed, but present, like a smudge of darkness across the glass. Ethan's pulse quickened. It hadn't left. It was still here, watching. He reached for the hammer he had kept by his side since that night, gripping it tightly, his knuckles white with tension. He approached the TV, his breath shallow. Every step felt like an eternity. The figure remained motionless in the screen, but Ethan knew better now. It was waiting for the right moment. With a sharp swing, Ethan shattered the screen, the glass exploding in a cascade of jagged shards. The apartment plunged into darkness, save for the flickering streetlights outside. Ethan stood frozen, his hammer still raised, his heart pounding in his chest. Silence. He waited. The minutes dragged on, but there was no movement, no sign of the entity. Had he done it again? Was this what his life had become? An endless battle against an enemy that could never truly die? The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Officer Harris. "Grayson, we need you down at the precinct. Another one just came in. Same MO." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Another one?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yeah, 5th victim this month. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, and no evidence. It's like the killer was never there." Ethan didn't respond at first. He glanced at the shattered screen on his floor, the broken glass reflecting the dim light from the street outside. "I'll be right there," he finally said, hanging up the phone. His mind raced, the weight of the situation settling in like a crushing force. As he grabbed his coat and headed for the door, he caught one final glimpse of his reflection in the hallway mirror. For the briefest moment, he saw it, standing right behind him, just out of reach, a dark figure with hollow eyes. And then, it was gone. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He knew what this meant. The entity wasn't done with him. Not yet. It was still out there, hiding in every reflection, waiting for the moment he let his guard down. The city slept, but Ethan wouldn't. Not anymore. The invisible killer had left its mark on him, and it was a scar that would never heal. Every mirror, every window, every shadow carried a reminder of the battle that still waged just beneath the surface of reality. And Ethan, forever bound to this haunting truth, would continue to fight it, alone in the silence of the night. As he stepped out into the cold, dark streets, he couldn't help but feel that no matter how many mirrors he smashed, no matter how many shadows he chased away, some things were impossible to escape. Because sometimes the darkness wasn't just out there, it was inside. And it was watching. Always.